Shalom and welcome again to another edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. Thank you very, very much for joining us in what I promise you will be a very, very interesting conversation today. Again, if you'd like to make a comment or a suggestion about any of our shows, podcasts, or ideas for Jewish Sacred Aging, please feel free to email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. Check out the website, jewishsacredaging.com, the Jewish Sacred Aging Facebook page, etc., etc. We are in the middle, just starting, really, the end of Elul, the beginning of the high holiday season. We'll be gathering to listen to services, Torah study, and portions in the coming couple of days. And one of those Torah portions deals with one of the great traumas in our book of Genesis, and that is Genesis 22 and the Akedah. And we are very, very pleased to welcome to today's edition two of my colleagues, Rabbi Lindsey Danziger, Rabbi Ben David, to discuss their new CCAR publication, CCR Press book, The Sacred Struggle, subtitled Jewish Responses to Trauma. I'm very, very much pleased and I'm grateful to my two colleagues for agreeing to come on and discuss this book. For my colleagues, Jewish educators, youth workers, please see if you can get a hold of this book. It's very, very useful. It is very, very important, and it is very timely for a whole variety of reasons. But first of all, let me again welcome Lindsey and Ben back to Seekers of Meaning. I hope both of you are well, your families are well, and I wish you a very, very peaceful, joyful, and most of all, healthy new year as we begin this season. First question, the title, The Sacred Struggle. What's with the word sacred? I would imagine some people who are going through trauma may say there's nothing sacred about this. So I'd like to ask you to unpack that. So, Lindsey, let me just start with you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having us and for your kind words. The word sacred going with trauma didn't resonate for me as much before the process of the book as it does now after seeing the process of our different colleagues and authors telling their stories. I think that itself was a sacred process. In every chapter, you can really see people did a little bit of tikkun through their struggle, through their trauma, whether it was working on themselves, whether it was creating a community organization to help others facing trauma, whether it was reaching out to others who are going through trauma, or even the act of putting it down on paper and sharing it in a book. So I think those ways that people respond to trauma are sacred in themselves. They're acts of partnering with God to heal the world. And those of us who haven't gone through trauma, which there really aren't any people who haven't gone through any trauma, but I think going through trauma comes with a sacred privilege and with a sacred responsibility to work on ourselves and to process it and to help others, reach out that helping hand, form community of others going through trauma. So to me, that's where the sacredness in the process of trauma comes from, in the responses to it.
Ben?
I agree with Lindsey. Certainly I agree with what she said. And I think part of the title comes from the idea that we should see our own story as sacred, and to see what we've overcome, what we've experienced as meaningful, that your story is not trite. Having endured a significant illness, a significant loss, some significant transition in life is not nothing. And let's consider carefully what we've lived through and acknowledge carefully that there's holiness in our own story. That what you have lived through, what you've overcome is yours, is unique, is precious, has helped to now define you, define your understanding of the world, of God, of faith. So I think that's where the word sacred comes in. And like Lindsey, I think in the beginning I was a little hesitant because as you'll see in the book, part of what brought Lindsey and I together is that we both had cancer at a relatively young age. And I think we were both reluctant to see our story as special or sacred. And I think it was only with time and with perspective, even the perspective of years, that we could really sort of, with some distance now, acknowledge that actually we had overcome something quite significant in life, and it had changed us. And we had grown as a result of this experience that we had. So there we are, and that's the title. It also fits into a broader series within the CCAR Press, so the title sort of fits within that series as well.
Ben, I love that, and I also, when you were speaking, it made me realize that each of the chapters is kind of a conversation between the person who experienced a trauma in their life or experienced a communal trauma, and they're kind of in conversation with our sacred texts. So they're sometimes arguing with our texts, talking about what doesn't resonate with them, or talking about what does resonate them from our sacred texts. So I think the sacredness is also just in taking our tradition and bringing it to life and testing it under the most difficult circumstances. And I think that's what sacred tradition, sacred text, sacred wisdom is for.
And the book encourages people to see their story as sacred, right? The book doesn't assume that we see our story as sacred. I think the book is challenging all of us who have experienced harder moments, and that's all of us, challenging us to see that struggle as sacred. And sort of asking hard questions of the reader to sort of see whether they're able to go there, or whether they might be willing to go there.
I thank you for that elaboration, because the definition in the beginning of the book, and I think it's in the introduction by Betsy Stone, talks about the fact that trauma is not the event. It's really I think she says, the emotional response to the event. And the two of you who have walked this walk, and the chapters written by various individuals, colleagues, et cetera, who also had to walk a certain part of this walk, it really is a testimony to how they responded out of their humanness and their own story, which is why this book, I think, is so important for people to share, because as you alluded to, everybody has a story. And to reference Deuteronomy 30:19, how they choose to respond to that event really does determine the type of life that they're going to lead. Is there a theology at all? Putting on the theological, could we say that Judaism has some sort of theology or theological approach to dealing with trauma? Or is it so individual and so personal?
I can try. Well, first of all, we were so blessed to have Betsy Stone open the book and help us to define trauma as a term. I think we all sort of hear that word. It's sort of part of our sort of cultural identity. We all speak of trauma. We all talk about being traumatized by certain events. We all live with sort of traumatic history. But to have her finally sort of shape that term, and I really appreciate the fact that she sort of gave us permission to see trauma as defined by the individual, right? So as you're noting, 100 of us could have experienced the same event. But in our understanding of it and sort of the aftermath of it, only 10 of us really were traumatized by it, because our relationship to that event, our understanding of that event, the sort of aftermath of that event was just different for us than it was for our neighbors. So trauma is really self-defined. And I do think struggle is so much a part of the Jewish story. So much of the Torah itself is about our people overcoming. I think the most obvious instance is Jacob wrestling with the angel, right? And eventually overcoming this angel and coming away changed. He will literally have a new name. and he'll have a new understanding of who he is. He'll have a new understanding of what it means to be in relationship with his family, with his estranged brother, and with God. And then throughout our sacred texts, we find all of these moments of struggle. We could point to Esther. We could point to Ruth. I think to be a Jew in so many ways is to overcome. And we've all struggled in ways that are personal, communal, theological. And I think Judaism actually encourages that and gives us space to do that in ways that are really healthy. Not to shy away from life's biggest questions, but to absolutely dive into them.
Yeah, the use of text and the juxtaposition, as you are alluding to, and the people who are writing in the book also as well, to see in the sacred text throughout our history, not just Tanakh, but ongoing, this idea of overcoming traumas, various just psychological, personal, communal, etc., which we're in the midst of anyway, which I'll get to in a second. But Lindsey, let me ask you, there's a wonderful essay by somebody who's taught probably all of us and many of the colleagues who will listen or watch this. Who was my dean and thesis advisor, Dr. Larry Hoffman, who's walked his own walk a couple of times here. And he has this great quote: God does not answer prayers for healing, but yet we pray for healing. Could you talk to me a little bit about the value of liturgy in dealing with traumatic experiences?
Yes. And I think that is a theme throughout the book also. What I wrote about in my chapter was about finding meaning in the traveler's prayer, Tefillat HaDerech, during cancer treatment. And I think if there were to be a theology of trauma in Judaism, it's that we're not alone, that we are never alone in our own trauma, as much as it's personal, as much as it's isolating, that we are in this together. And I think the fact that our liturgy is always kind of in the plural, and especially the traveler's prayer, save us, guide us, rescue us. Even if you're alone in the cancer treatment room, you're invoking all the people who have walked that journey before you, all the people of the Jewish people who have struggled before you, been in dangerous places. And I think that the prayer journey is so personal. And I also loved Larry Hoffman's essay, which I think was really freeing. I think the essay gave people a lot of freedom to say that prayer is what you make of it. Your conversation with God is different for each person. And that too is part of the Jewish tradition. Having a really personal relationship with God, having a really personal prayer experience, that is also our tradition. And when you ask about a theology of trauma, it's not so so clear cut for Jews. But I think the one thing we're really given as this guidepost is our liturgy, is words to help make sense of what's happening, words to speak to God with, and words that we say in the plural. And you mentioned we're about to come up on our high holiday season. We also confess in the plural. When we stand before God, even if we're physically standing alone or going through something alone, we're never really standing before God alone. And that's so evident in our liturgy.
And Dr. Zierler's poet essay, who incorporates a lot of poetry, and also I think our colleague Dahlia Marks from Israel, who did a wonderful podcast for us on her book, but also understanding, as you're alluding to, the people creating liturgy now, creating their own interpretations of traditional liturgy, or in one of the workshops we do at Jewish Sacred Aging is on all this new liturgy and prayers that are being created specifically to deal with life situations that perhaps were not in the Talmud. but are very, 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 very present. Ben, do you see the role of, or how do you see the role of traditional prayer and meditation, allowing somebody to tell their story or to come to be present with how they respond to traumatic situations?
Yeah. Well, I think this book exists largely, or to a certain degree, because in our experience as rabbis, we found that people were often without the words that they were looking for, right? That when you're in a hospital bed, or when you're in recovery, or when you're in the immediate aftermath of a very painful divorce, or just leaving an abusive relationship, or dealing with addiction, or any one of these sort of painful life moments, that often there were not words available to them. There were not the words that helped them to express, to emote, and to reach out to God. And this book comes along, and as Lindsey's pointing out, first of all, it says you're not alone, that there are others who have dealt with what you're dealing with, and here are some words that help them. Maybe these words will help you too. And some of it, as we're saying, is sort of traditional prayer, but some of it is in the form of poetry or song. And the idea is that the book is meant to help people. It's meant to help people. This is not sort of meant to be an academic exercise. This book is not meant to be hypothetical. It's meant to be a helpful force for those who are experiencing something profound, and the people around them too, who by extension are experiencing something profound.
And I also, just to speak to that as well, I really appreciated what you said, Richard, about how there might be stories that aren't part of our traditional canon of sacred texts, but they really, they add to it in a unique way. And so I think some of the chapters, like Rabbi Ariel Tovlev talking about a gender transition, Rabbi Karen Hurlman talking about pregnancy loss and infertility, and Rabbi Aya Pillsbury talking about sexual assault. These are stories that really, I think, needed to be added and put down and be somewhere where people can access them and read them, because I think those stories belong in the sacred canon too, and they add a lot to people's ability to cope and see themselves in our tradition when they're going through something like that.
Yeah, I'm glad, because that's a great segue, and we didn't rehearse this at all. So,
Oh, perfect.
no, the breadth of subject matter, which is why I want to stress again to our colleagues and educators that, I could see this also being used in confirmation, post-confirmation classes, because some of these issues really speak to that young adult transition moment too. So for example, these are some of the other that Lindsey alluded to. Transgender chapters on, with people writing about their experience with transgender addictions, depression, disabilities, racism, rape, gun violence, being a first responder. I think it was your dad, assassinations. Is that your dad?
My father-in-law, yes, was rabbi in Memphis
Tell him I
when
said
Dr.
hello.
Martin Luther King was assassinated.
Yeah, we go back to the old days with Rabbi Jakosky of blessed memory, but
Very nice.
dealing with 9/11, Parkland, the Tree of Life, natural disasters, ethical misconduct in the reform movement, leaving a toxic community, retirement, divorce, infertility, stillbirth, suicide, and the death of a child. All these are part of the sacred struggle. And as every congregational rabbi knows, and all colleagues know, there are people in our communities who are living this right now. Every single one of these things that we talked about, in one way, shape, or another, people in our communities are dealing with, have dealt with, or in many cases will deal with it, including the medical stuff. So this is why this book really speaks to our community in the year 2025, in the beginning, at the end of the first quarter of the 21st century, because we're living it. I want to ask you about, because it's going to be on sermons and going to be and still on the mind and engendering such traumatic response, we can use that term amongst our communities. You allude to this in the context of the book, the difference between a personal trauma and a communal trauma. How do you use this book in sitting down with members of our community who are dealing with the communal trauma of the rise in anti-Semitism and the war in Gaza? Because you can't escape it. You can't escape it. So
yeah, well, one of our goals in this book was that when one of our colleagues, and I'll get to the second part of your question in a sec, but we so often see colleagues reaching out, whether it's on Facebook or personally, hey, this traumatic thing happened in my community. Has anyone been through this? I need to figure out how to respond, and I need to do it quickly. So in this book, you can open up a chapter and find a colleague who has a really personal story to tell, so you can get that sense of empathy, and also a little bit of how our Jewish tradition or our texts have responded to that thing that someone in their own community is going through. So it's meant to be really usable, really practical. And of course, this communal trauma that we're all going through now that you asked about the war in Gaza, post-October 7th, anti-Semitism. And the first chapter that came to my mind was Rabbi David Spinrad, who talks about the compounding of intergenerational trauma from a really personal place, as someone who feels like he's carrying intergenerational trauma, and then seeing what's happening in the Jewish world right now and how he wrestles with that personally and how he looks to our tradition. So really the interplay of personal trauma with communal trauma. And we started talking about Betsy Stone's definition that multiple people can go through the same situation and experience it in so many multiple different ways. So I think our colleagues right now are charged with a really difficult and really sacred task of shepherding a whole community through trauma, and also being there for the individuals going through their own trauma. And one of our greatest hopes is that the texts, the spiritual practices offered in this book can help with both, can help with guiding a whole community through a moment of rising anti-Semitism, struggle with Israel, care and concern and anxiety for our hostages, everything that our people are feeling as a whole, and also give people the really concrete tools to process and deal with that as individuals.
Ben, do we understand that trauma can be passed from generation to generation?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I know that firsthand as the grandson of Holocaust survivors. I think we do inherit trauma in various ways, whether within a family, within the Jewish community, as Americans. I think there are traumas that are embedded into our sort of Jewish practice. At any given moment, the Jew is navigating everything from the Holocaust to October 7th. We're all living with that sort of deep within. October 7th, of course, was just 2 years ago. The Holocaust was 80 years ago. And yet we sort of live with it within us. It informs who we are and how we see the world, how we see ourselves. I think we do that as Americans. 9/11 is a part of us. It's part of our understanding of this country. So absolutely, I think trauma is inherited. But then the question is, what do we do with it? Where do we put it? Do we allow it to sort of diminish us and eat at us? Or do we sort of somehow find a way to put it into sort of positive practice, helping others, healing others, speaking out on the issues? That's the question.
Both of you have written, and Ben did a podcast for us several years ago about his cancer journey. In your own personal lives as you navigated this issue of trauma? Where did you go for your own strength? Where was that sense of nachama, that sense of comfort or strength in your own? So where did you find that?
All right, I'll try. Well, that's a great question. I found that sort of keeping up some sort of routine was useful. So I've been studying Daf Yomi for a long time, a page of Talmud a day, and I found that keeping up with that, even while in the hospital, I spent a long time in the hospital when I was sick. I found that useful. It helped me to feel sort of human and not fully detached from sort of my quote unquote normal life. I found a lot of comfort in the loving presence of family and friends. You know, I'm blessed to have a big family, big extended family. And if we're being very honest, I found a lot of comfort in music. I listened to a lot of music while lying there in my bed. You know, these are the places that I think Jews often go, and that I certainly went. I think, you know, part of this book, if we're talking about the book again, is that, you know, as rabbis, all the time we're shepherding and helping and framing for others. But we ourselves clearly are not immune to life's hardest challenges. And so while this book exists for us in our sort of maybe our congregational capacity or our rabbinic capacity, it also exists for us in our own sort of very personal lives. I think I might have appreciated having a book like this once upon a time while I was lying in that hospital bed.
Mm. Yeah. Thanks, Ben. And for me, a practice that really resonates is hakarat hatov. Like, even when it's the most challenging, to recognize what is good. And I experienced, when I was diagnosed with cancer, just people showing up in ways I never would have imagined that people showed up. I learned that people are so much kinder than I knew they were before, that people are so much more thoughtful than I had ever known. And it was like this terrible thing was happening to me at the same time as this amazing thing was happening to me, learning that my community was strong, learning how loved I was. Also, in like when you're diagnosed with a specific cancer at a young age, you find this really niche group of people who have a similar diagnosis at a similar age, learning that complete strangers were willing to show up for me in ways that if I'm going to be honest, I don't think before this I would have ever thought to show up for a complete stranger in that way. So really learning about how much other people have their capacity to care, to help, and to circle was a blessing, which it sounds like at the time I would not have used the word blessing about anything. Now looking back, I'm able to use that word. And in the conclusion of the book, when I was thinking like, what's the nehemta? How do you end this book where people really bared their souls and told these stories that are really heavy and really hard? And the person who came to mind, both because of what was in the news at the time and because of how powerfully she has impacted me personally over the past year or two, was Rachel Goldberg Polin, who I think also practices hakarat hatov. And at her son's funeral, she said, I want to say thank you to God for giving me the perfect son for me. And she does a lot of naming people who showed up for her in this traumatic time. And so I feel like if even she can recognize the good in the world and the godliness in traumatic experiences and draw strength from that and provide others with strength from that, I think that that's just a reminder to me, like a real challenge and a call to me, how important it is to practice recognizing the good, practice daily gratitude, even and especially when it's really difficult.
It does speak to the good that comes or can come from trauma. You know, I like Lindsey's saying, I was connected suddenly to people I might not have ever met, and sort of bonded with people I might not have ever met. There was this great column in the New York Times in the Modern Love section about what it means to be a cancer patient and feel such connection to those in the waiting room with you, because you can relate to each other, you understand each other in a world that sort of doesn't quite understand what it means to be a cancer patient. You feel such a sense of bond, such a affinity with this group. And there is good that can come from trauma. There is. And I think we're both sort of living proof of that. You know, I think for me, it taught me a lot. It certainly made me a better rabbi. And while I wouldn't wish it on anyone, and I wouldn't wish it on myself, I think it did ultimately make me a better person.
Let me, before we start running out of time, just what you're saying, and thank you very, very much for doing that. Is there a contemporary type of trauma of isolation and being cut off? And are we really living through a lot of that right now and not really understanding it?
Probably. I think, I think so much of that is tied to social media. You know, we're disconnected from each other and so connected to our devices. And I think there is a lot of loneliness in today's world. I think there is. I see that at the synagogue. There's the illusion of connection sometimes, but true human connection and conversation, having a meal with someone, I think there is trauma there. I think we're not together in ways that we were 30 or 50 years ago. I think that's true. And I think it shows. I think it shows in our kids and our teens and their ability to navigate problems and their ability to get to know people, to talk to people. I mean, I think it's clear. I think COVID sort of compounded that issue quite a bit for so many. But you're right, there is a trauma there.
And I think that makes our faith institutions and our holy communities so much more important. They're countercultural. Like, we're doing something radical by saying we're going to be here in community. We're going to show up for each other. We're going to be here together. And it's not a given. Just because you have a synagogue doesn't mean it's going to be that type of holy community. You have to really work at it. One thing I would actually, I don't know. I see it in a different way then about social media, because one of the places I found comfort was in connecting with other people going through the same thing online. So I think social media can be isolating when we don't have to get out of the house and connect with people and form those connections. And then something terrible happens to us. And then you find out, I mean, it's just me and my device. That is an epidemic. That is isolating. But you could also use social media. I connected with people all over the world who are young people with the same diagnosis that I have, which is rare to be a young person with this diagnosis. And I got emotional support. I got a lot of good recommendations, treatment recommendations, doctor recommendations. And so from my personal experience, social media actually helped combat that isolation, because no matter how amazing my local community and family was, they didn't know what it was like to be going through that exact experience. And here is this whole community of people who knew exactly what it was like, which that made a huge difference for me.
Last question. Given the fact that you've walked this walk, given the fact that you read through all these essays and, you know, had probably countless conversations about them with yourselves and with the people at CCR Press, for somebody who may be listening to this or watching this who is struggling, what piece of advice would you give them?
I think, first of all, question number one is there's help to be had. No matter what you're going through, there is help to be had. This book is sort of a testament to the fact that someone else has dealt with what you're dealing with. Maybe not in exactly the same way, but there's help to be had. Thank God we live in a time of science and medicine and technology, which can be incredible tools. I think that's why we're here at all, is because of the blessing of modern science and medicine. And that, even outside of sort of medicine and diagnoses and all of these things, there's people who love you and care about you. And if you're part of a synagogue community, all the more so there's people that love and care about you and are ready to talk with you, listen to you, and help you.
I agree. The first thing I would say is you are not alone. Even if it feels like you're alone, even if you don't know what that looks like to be not alone, just hear those words. You are not alone. There are other people who have been going through this. You will find someone who cares about you. Just to internalize those words, you're not alone. And the other is that this isn't forever. We don't recover from trauma, but it changes. It changes us. It becomes less intense. We grow from it. The book talks about post-traumatic growth as well. And just knowing that this isn't forever. Everything is temporary. Back to that traveler's prayer. It's a journey. And knowing that that we're all on this journey together.
Rabbi Lindsey Danziger, Rabbi Benjamin David, thank you very, very much. Again, the book is The Sacred Struggle, subtitled Jewish Responses to Trauma, CCAR Press, available wherever you get your books. Again, to my colleagues, educators, etc., please pick this up and use it in the congregation, your organization, Hillel work, college campuses, camps. We are all going through aspects of this, and to be embraced and supported by the tradition and our text, as well as the community. Kol hakavod. To both of you, thank you very much. Have a sweet, but most of all, healthy new year. Say hello to your families for me. Take care. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much.
To all of you, thank you for joining us on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. Again, I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. If you'd like to make a suggestion or comment to these podcasts, please feel free to email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. If you'd like to support the work, if you go to the website, jewishsacredaging.com, you will find a very conveniently located donate button. If you just click on that button, follow the prompts, it's really, really easy, and we do appreciate it. If you'd like to become a sponsor of some of these podcasts, again, please email me. Seekers of Meaning is produced at the Broadcast Center of Lubetkin Media Companies in beautiful, bucolic, gentle Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And a big shout out to our producer, Steve Lubetkin. Again, I'm your host. I thank you very, very much for your joining us and your time. We appreciate it. And until we see each other again, have a happy new year, a safe one, a healthy one. And most of all, be kind to one another. Shalom, Todah.